Section 13 starts to introduce a concept called organisational behaviour. So what we're going to try and do is just to consider how an organisation behaves, and various parts of the organisation and how they behave over time, and also try and think about why this might be really useful for a business to know. So we start off with a definition here. According to Mullins, this whole point of looking at organisational behaviour is so that we can think about both individual and group behaviour within this organisational setting, so obviously within our business. And once we can understand that, it's going to really help us to improve our performance and our effectiveness, hopefully, into the future. So it's a really important aspect of running a business to consider, how your organisation actually behaves. Now, when we're talking about how an organisation behaves, what does that actually mean? What are we talking about? Who are we talking about in terms of behaviour? And 13.2, the organisational iceberg, really gives us a nice indication of what we really mean by that. So just over the page, we've got our organisational iceberg. So you can see here, we've split our organisational iceberg into two. And if I were to think about effectively where my water line would be, something like this. And the whole point of this is you can't just consider those behaviours that everyone can see. So the kind of overt behaviours or formal aspects, things like, who my customers are, what technology do I use, what are my facilities like, what does the organisational design look like, so what does my organisational chart look like, who reports into which department, and so on. There's obviously going to be some rules and regulations, and all these do help to give us an idea of what our organisation looks like from the outside. However, it's really important that we don't just focus on those overt aspects. We really need to think about those things that you can't always see, so the things that are below the waterline. So we may have an organisational chart, but how do people actually communicate? And whilst we have formal processes, what really happens on a day-to-day basis? What are people's personalities? Are there lots of conflict? What games are people playing in terms of power? So in order to understand completely what the organisation looks like, we really need to consider both these above and below the waterline aspects. And we've got a nice quote at the top there: what sinks ships isn't always what sailors can see, but what they can't see. So it's very dangerous just to focus on the overt aspects when you're considering how your organisation behaves. Now, if we just pick on one small part of the below the waterline here and think about personality, think about the personalities of people who work within the organisation. It's very difficult to try and paint everybody with the same brush. So we really need to understand how different people are going to behave. And the rest of the kind of first half of this chapter, chapter 2, really start to look at those individual behaviours. So what motivates people? How do people behave in certain scenarios? And then we can start thinking about bringing those people together. So what happens when I put person A and person B together in a team? How are they going to react? What types of people do we need in our team, and so on? So 13.3 starts to introduce these models of human behaviour. We know that a model is a way of trying to look at what's happened in the past and consider how we can use that going forward. And the first model we're going to have here is all about Taylor. We've obviously already spoken about Taylor. Taylor was the theorist who designed one best way of doing something. If you remember, came up with the perfect size shovel to make sure that his employees were kind of at their most efficient level. Now, if you remember, Taylor was quite old-fashioned and perhaps not perfectly suited to how a modern business works. But let's have a look at what Taylor said. He had three main assumptions around human behaviour. So when he was looking at his workforce, he had these three assumptions that covered everybody. And his conclusions that we're going to see in a sec only really work if you buy into those assumptions. So the first one is that people were rational economic animals who were concerned with maximising their economic gain. Okay, so people were very interested in money. Okay, so they wanted to maximise their own wealth. They wanted to make money, and in fact they were willing to work harder if it meant they were going to make more money. So it wasn't a case of people are lazy or anything like this, really. What it meant was that actually I'm willing to work much harder as long as there's some sort of kind of economic return that's going to come. The second assumption was that you can't just treat everyone the same, and actually people react a lot better if they are treated as individuals rather than the group. So you have to be quite specific by thinking about how I need to treat this particular person, rather than thinking, right, my workforce is just this big group. Now, actually, that does sound, at first glance, that it might contradict the third assumption, which was that people can be treated in a standardised fashion. You still refer to individuals within this kind of standardised fashion. It just means, this third assumption, that we treat human resource the same as any other resource. Okay, so it's just another resource. So I've got a nice bank of machines, I've got this human resource, and I shouldn't really consider them any different. Okay, so one is, both in fact are just resources that I can use to try and maximize my output. From those three assumptions then, Taylor was able to form three main conclusions. The first conclusion was that when you were trying to motivate people, actually it was this high wages, this monetary reward that was going to be the biggest motivator. The manager's job was to tell people what to do, because people inherently don't want to have to think about it, and the worker's job was just to do what they are told and get paid. So again, this constant reference to money, all linking back to our economic gain. McGregor had two separate approaches. So McGregor suggested that either you have a theory X approach or you have a theory Y approach. And actually this was really all about how the manager perceives his workers. So when I'm deciding how to behave in a certain scenario as a manager, I might consider some people to be a theory X style employee, some to be a theory Y. So theory X was again quite old-fashioned, quite hierarchical, and the assumption was that people actually really didn't like going to work. So you only go to work because you absolutely have to. You have to go there to get paid, but if there's an opportunity for you to kind of slack off a bit, you absolutely will do that. Okay, so this is the theory X approach. And you guys might have had jobs in the past where actually this kind of does fit you, and while you're doing a Saturday job whilst you're at college or university or whatever, you might have kind of felt a bit like that. I don't really want to go to work, but hopefully, as people go through their careers, that starts to become less of an issue. So Theory X also assumed that people lacked ambition. We're happy just to do whatever we're doing right now. I'm not really bothered about doing any better. I just want to do enough to get paid and then go home. They dislike responsibility and they prefer to be led. So you can see a few similarities here between this Theory X. They prefer to be led, for example, and Taylor above. So just do what we're told to do. And in order to motivate people then, if you are taking this Theory X assumption, you need a mixture of coercion, control, so procedures, and some punishment. Okay, so if people aren't doing what they're supposed to, you dock them a day's pay, for example, and actually that then brings them back in line. They don't want to be at work, but they know that they're not going to get paid unless they do a certain standard. And above all then, what we're really looking for as employees is just security. So like I said, we do enough to keep our job, enough to keep getting paid, and then we kind of do no more than that. Now, Theory Y was the other end of the spectrum, and Theory Y said, well, actually, do people really dislike work? Some people are going to think it's as natural as rest or play, so they love going to work, and they put effort in both physically and mentally because they take pride in what they're doing. The commitment to our overall organisational objectives then is not given through punishment but through rewards. So giving people what they want is going to make them much more motivated to go out and work hard for you. Shouldn't all be about external control, so it's not just about telling people what to do. Actually, self-control and direction are very important. So your workers should have some sort of self-direction, some sort of way of deciding what they're going to do. Again, opposite to Theory X, people learn to like responsibility. So give me more responsibility. That's what I'm craving. So for example, you might give someone responsibility for a big task at the end of the month, or you might give somebody responsibility for another member of staff. So you give them a subordinate to work with. Theory Y concluded then that actually intellectually we only partially utilise our overall potential, and we need to, as an organisation, help to develop that further. And the reward for doing so is that you're going to get a much more motivated and dedicated employee on the end of it. So we've had to think about organisational behaviour. We think about how we might perceive certain employees and their behaviour. In the next recording then we'll pick up with motivation. We'll start off with Maslow and we'll work through a few different theories in terms of what motivates people.